Games are the only medium after books that you spend more than 3 hours with. You can immerse yourself in them for days and weeks. Game developers are trying to engage you out of sincere desire to share their work with you, or out of need to convince you to pay and ideally tell your friends about the game. The goal is the same. They have to win you over. And not just through marketing, but in the first few minutes of your experience. I've been playing the first hour of games for over 2 years. In the first hour you will find out whether or not you will enjoy the game. You can apply this to all genres and you certainly can judge a game after an hour, but you can judge your first impression. A gut feeling can tell a lot. I want to share my impressions with you and I'm curious how you feel about them. I'm Al Copo from Millennial vs. Game Library and these are my impressions of the first hour of infamous Second Son. In the first few minutes of infamous Second Son, the game introduces you to Delsin, a young man who enjoys vandalizing the local sheriff's billboard. An hour later you are flying with Delsin around Seattle putting down soldiers armed to the teeth. And it makes sense, unless you start analyzing it. Getting the player into the game's story and mechanics in the first hour of play is an art of sorts. For starters, you can't be afraid of simplifications. Developing a sequel which can stand on its own is a challenge. The creators must introduce you to their existing world from the start, as quickly as possible. Infamous Second Son addresses this with opening credits that explains the state the world is in. It's a good idea, but it could be more inventive.
What's the matter, Danny? You never taken a shortcut before?
We cut to the small town of Salmon Bay, surrounded by forests. The fictional Native American Eccomish tribe lives there. Yet, or perhaps because of this, an unaccompanied armored vehicle carrying dangerous bioterrorists drives through this picturesque place. Unexpectedly, an accident occurs and the bioterrorists flee to the city. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We first meet Delsin, our hero, during the spraying sequence. More important than him was a presentation of the new PS4 controller's features. After successfully throwing the control out of your hand a few times in an attempt to shake the virtual spray, Delsin finishes his work and I have to admit it's not bad. The arriving sheriff probably thinks otherwise, so Delsin goes on the run. We meet Betty next, a character through whom the creators introduce us to the community. Betty represents home, tradition, the place from which Delsin came and for which we are supposed to want to fight. Like a proper mother figure, Betty will give Delsin time to escape and we will finally take control. The following is a movement tutorial. Delsin is a decent climber. His fingers would put an assassin to shame. But the escape ends when the Delsin runs into a local sheriff. Reggie is Delsin's brother and in a brief exchange we learn the classic clichés. Their parents are no longer alive and Reggie is older and more responsible. He expects Delsin to start acting like an adult too. Delsin suffers from younger sibling syndrome, feeling unappreciated and overshadowed by a brother who doesn't trust him enough. The sibling hassle is fortunately interrupted by the armored car crash from which the bioterrorists flee to the city. The protagonists are outlined. It's time to throw them into action. To get things moving, Reggie orders Delsin to do nothing. Instead of securing the crashed armored car, he goes after the escaped bioterrorists. Not to be nitpicky, but shouldn't Delsin have run to a nearby building to get a phone? I understand that Reggie went to protect civilians from the bioterrorists, but shouldn't he, as a police officer, have secured the car crash until the other forces arrived? Well, he couldn't. The devs need Delsin near the armored car alone. Delsin will naturally help the shaken bioterrorists who will naturally use Delsin as a shield when Reggie arrives. Reggie wants to save Delsin. Delsin wants to save Reggie. And the bioterrorist wants to get away, so he sucks the smoke from the burning armored car and intends to resolve the situation with violence. Delsin grabs his hand and absorbs his ability. From now on, Delsin is a conduit/bioterrorist. What I find odd is that Delsin wakes up alone by a burning armored car while his brother is off chasing bioterrorists again. I don't know about you, but if my sibling passed out after coming into contact with a dangerous person, and was left unconscious by a burning armored car, I'd probably be taking care of him, not the guy who's gonna be shooting flames at me. But what's the point of logic when you've got sparkling particles everywhere and it looks good?
Stop it!
Delsin finds Reggie wedged under a car. After another brief sibling moment, the two brothers hurry to a local factory. They deduce that the bioterrorist has taken refuge there. Meanwhile, the tribe members have already made their way to the factory. An unconquerable fence blocks the brothers' way to the factory. Because Reggie is the brother of the year, he lets the unstable Delsin into the burning factory, where a stable bioterrorist is on the rampage. Delsin expends his powers while pursuing the bioterrorist. The fight ends in a rather unsatisfactory contact. Delsin does learn more about the bioterrorist's fate, that his name is Hank and that he spent time in a detention facility, but more importantly, he has no way to help Delsin. Once you get the ability, there is no turning it back. I find it irritating that after the fight in the factory, there is a whole DUP unit waiting for you outside, headed by the Supreme Boss herself. Indeed, Madame Augustine is the most qualified to hunt down bioterrorists because, among other things, her ability to create concrete is highly effective. But then why didn't she accompany the convoy and, if not her, at least one unit of DUP soldiers? Obviously they were pretty close to Salmon Bay. Now, that's what I call a waste of federal money. Either way, Hank is going to get stuck in concrete and Delsin will earn himself some of that good old torture in the name of national security with his moronic blathering. The developers here introduce us to the fundamental mechanics of karma. Delsin can admit to having superpowers himself or let Augustine torture the rest of the tribe. In this case, the outcome is always the same. Delsin passes out and wakes up in the infirmary. Delsin behaves differently in cutscenes depending on which karma path you choose. So it's up to us whether we want a hero or a scumbag. My Delsin confessed and sacrificed, but it didn't do any good. Betty reminds us in a brief conversation that the tribe sticks together. Reggie tells us that the tribe is dying because concrete can only get out of the human body the same way it got in. The doctors who stopped by claim this.
Yeah, why bother?
Delsin feels responsible for the situation and comes to the fantastic conclusion that he just needs to suck the concrete ability out of Augustine. Then he could heal the tribe. So the brothers leave and head to Seattle.
Not a great plan.
Betty works well in this part. She doesn't blame us. She reminds us that there are values and higher principles. She discourages Delsin from feeling guilty because that doesn't lead to anything good. Reggie, on the other hand, gives us vital information for a shortcut. And that's it. Voice of Reason and Caution is persuaded to go to Seattle, which doesn't strike me as a consistent character development. In the car, the brothers further clarify the situation around bioterrorists and society's views of abilities. They're actually doing it for us, to understand how society simplifies the issue into black and white. Another tutorial area gets in their way, making it impossible for them to travel by car and separating them. Suddenly a bus of people in need appears from nowhere, and Reggie runs to save them. It gives Delsin some peace to learn new skills. Later he makes a route between the concrete roadblocks. The bus can now head to Seattle, but without Delsin. People don't want him on the bus. He may have helped them, but they said on TV that people with abilities are evil. Better safe than sorry, right? Reggie promises his brother he will return for him, but Delsin is stubborn enough to walk to Seattle. In the tunnel, which I don't think a bus would pass through, he encounters armed thugs and is shot. And that's the end. The tribe dies on the concrete and Reggie marries Augustine in Seattle. Nice couple. Delsin comes to life because he can regenerate quickly and deals with the thugs. I wonder why the thugs didn't try it on the bus though. It could be more clever twist, considering that the people on the bus feared Delsin but would be attacked by armed thieves. On the other hand, we are rushing to much cooler parts. Before Delsin gets out of the tunnel, we hear an explosion that cuts radio communication with Reggie. The DUP destroyed the bridge to Seattle. Reggie can't come back for us, so we fly over the crumbling bridge in a cool sequence. All this to set up us for the game's first proper clash. The story takes a backseat here, and the game and emotions come to the fore. We see that the DUP are somewhat trigger-happy and leave a lot of havoc in their wake. We are gonna save Reggie in a minute and 12. He reminds us again that we are basically walking into a trap, which Delsin ignores of course, because then we wouldn't be having much fun. So we head to the checkpoint. Where, words wonder, the scanners reveal that Delsin is a conduit and the battle with the DUP begins. From now on, Delsin is set on the path of a district liberator who destroys public property and frees detainees regardless of whether they happen to be detained by right. I understand it's always tricky with villains, their minions, and the consequences of their actions. The army and police must obey orders, and civilians will always struggle with the definition of freedom and law. Sometimes we need shortcuts. The game hour is coming to an end here. The tasks for the characters have been broken down, we've been introduced to most of the core mechanics, and we can decide if we enjoyed the game enough so far. I've played Infamous Second Son twice, and not once has the game grabbed me by the balls. The story and hero annoyed me, and the game mechanics like combat and interaction with the world didn't catch me. I'm no stranger to superheroes. I like action-adventure games. Maybe Second Son needs more time. Perhaps it's just a mediocre game, a PS4 launch title that was supposed to impress with its visuals, but fails to come up with a memorable story and gameplay. And that's it. Let me know in the comments if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. I look forward to share the next video with you. Ciao!